everyone, welcome back to the Market Made channel and happy Friday. Today we're going to be discussing how to design your space and what things to consider. There's a lot that goes into designing your space. It may seem easy to design a space, but if you don't formulate a well-executed plan and know how to execute, it could become very difficult, time-consuming, and even costly to you. I know I have made that mistake in the past, and I probably will again, because I'm definitely the type of person that before checking order times or calling experts or anything, I just start demolitioning and I just go for it. And hopefully my suggestions will really resonate with you, so that way you can feel a little bit more confident as you're starting these beginning stages. I broke down this video into three major categories. The first, what questions to ask yourself, because there are three different questions you really need to kickstart the project to figure out how much time and money and effort you're going to put into this project. The second category is design considerations. What do you need to go over before you start designing? This one is pretty huge because I think it'll give you a good roadmap for where you're starting off and where you want to end up being. The last category is just about basics of designing, some tips and other suggestions that'll hopefully just sort of link everything together and connect everything to give you some answers and clarity of where you need to go and what directions you need to take. Questions to ask yourself before you get started. The first question is, do you own or rent? If you don't own the property, personally, I wouldn't invest too much money or time into the project. You don't want to add equity into someone else's property if you are not going to see a return on that. That should be the first question you ask yourself. Personally, I wouldn't do that because you're just going to add more value to something that's not really your own. And you should save that money for when you get a place that truly is your own. However, I do understand in bigger cities, you're probably never going to own, most likely, unless you move to the suburbs. If you're going to be a long-term renter, there are some other ways you can really design the space to be your own that I'll discuss later, but without getting into very costly renovations or projects. So the next question, whether you own or rent, is actually a pretty detrimental question. How long do you plan on living there? I have a rule of thumb that depending on the length of time you plan on living in this space is going to dictate how you're going to renovate, paint, and decorate that space. There are three different timelines that I usually try to focus on. If you're gonna be in a place 3 years or less, you don't want to do 2 or more types of renovations or painting or projects. You don't want to have to worry about painting everything again or redecorating or getting it ready to sell. That should be the last of your concern. So if you're living in a property 3 years or less, you should really focus on resale value. That should be your number one priority when you're decorating and designing your space. Between 3 to 5 years, you should focus on a balance between designing it for you and resale value, because you want it to be your own because you're going to be there for a significant period of time, but you should also look to the future. And later in the video, I'll discuss what renovations you should focus on in that 3 to 5 year window. So stay tuned for those tips and tricks later in the video. And if you plan on staying in your home for 5 years or longer, you can really make it what you want. Because by the time you move out, you'll already have added enough equity to basically forgive whatever unique design choices or paint colors you picked that someone else might not like. So you really don't have to worry about resale value or short-term gains as much, because you're going to naturally build equity for a longer period of time, which is pretty convenient for you. And although that seems like you might not be interested in the rest of this video, definitely stay tuned, because my next section especially gives you a roadmap for success and sort of helps walk you through those questions you need to ask yourself and go over some of the details that you might not know that you're skipping or missing. The next question to ask yourself is, what is your timeline? When do you want this to be done? How long do you think it'll take? And figuring that out. Because if you don't ahead of time, you could end up like me with our kitchen renovation, where it's been over a month and we still don't have a stove and we only have a refrigerator and we are living off of sandwiches and takeout. Oh, and cereal. There are many parts of your project you can do right away, like painting, accessories, sometimes even flooring, but there are a lot that actually take a lot of time to do, and you need to look at the order dates. So if you're doing a kitchen or bathroom renovation, if you have a very particular style you're going for, it might take 1 to 2 months or even longer to order them. You also don't know how backed up your contractors are, so you really need to call them to see what their scheduling and availability is long term. So make sure to do your research about time frames, ordering, calling experts and professionals to help you out before you start demolitioning, because I'm guilty of that and I'm going through it right now. Category number 2, design considerations. The first part of design considerations is, what is the room's purpose? This may not seem that important, or it might seem very logical. You shouldn't have to think about it too much. But what you really want to take into consideration is, what do you want to do in the room and how you're going to use it, and what do you need out of it? For example, if you spend most of your time entertaining in the kitchen versus normally like a dining room or a living room, maybe you want to look into adding additional counter space or seating, or expanding your kitchen. Or if you eat and entertain more in the living room, maybe you want to add some extra layered carpeting for it to be a little bit more warm and welcoming, a little bit cushier if you're entertaining a lot of people and don't have enough seating. Another example would be if you eat with your family in the dining room and you have younger children and you need hardwood floors or laminate for easy cleanup. There are a lot of aspects and details to consider when you're preparing your design for your room, especially for the purpose of the room, and it's probably the most important starting point for you on your design process. The second and most important one is taboo. What is your budget? I know it's not glamorous. I know it's not fun to talk about. I know it's sometimes uncomfortable to talk about, to figure out how many dollars you're going to put towards this. But you really need to figure this out ahead of time to sort of dictate where your money's going to go and what you're going to prioritize. Obviously, the fun part is designing, but you really need to come up with a plan and figure out what your priorities are. If you have a big project and a smaller budget, you'll really have to know how to cut costs. So an example of prioritizing your needs, when I was going through this kitchen renovation, I had this very specific design, and then I saw the price tag and I was like, yeah, I'd rather have new appliances, and we also needed new electrical and a finished ceiling. It was it's a huge renovation, but I was like, this is our budget, we're sticking to it. So I still had my general design, but I did have to sacrifice a lot of the smaller details that I could swap out for more inexpensive products. Instead of getting butcher block, purchased in stock laminate, which was a lot cheaper, saved us $500 or more. So that way we could take that money and spend it on the new appliances, spend it on re-drywalling, spend it on the new electrical for the details that are going to add more value long term. You have to also consider it's still going to look good. Even though you're changing your design a little bit, you're still going to get what you want, which is a brand new space. So the third part of design considerations is style considerations, because there's actually a lot to think about within the style consideration category. There are 3 parts of style considerations that you need to go over. It seems like it might be pretty self-explanatory, but it's really not. So the first part is, do you have a certain look or style that you're trying to achieve? But a little tip, you do want to do some research online and try to come up with an idea board to figure out what your style is. However, then you need to consider, what is the overall style and look of the house? Because you don't want one room to be Victorian and then the next room to be rustic and the next room to be modern. You need to have a cohesive look. It's sort of like styling yourself. You're not going to wear a suit coat with jogging shorts and then sandals. When you put a look together for yourself, you want it to be well coordinated, right? It's the same thing with the house. Not to say you can't have drastic different looks, but it needs to have some sort of connection, which can be hard to find. If you buy a house that's an old craftsman style house or Victorian, but you actually like modern, you need to consider your style and how the house Style can all be connected and related and coordinated, which can be obviously difficult. The last part of style considerations is trends. Just avoid them unless you plan on redoing everything biannually. Make the space your own design. Don't try to follow trends. If you see something online and you want to take a part of a trend, go for it. But I usually try to avoid trends. I usually go with more classic looks, but completely up to you and the vision of your space. The last part of design considerations is actually how big is the room size. You may not think that that's very important, but there are certain standards for room sizing when it comes to trim, crowd molding, height of cabinets, height of mirrors. There's actually a lot to consider when you're talking about measuring out the room. The size of the room could actually dictate your purchases, your color scheme, your layout, how large the furniture needs to be, area rugs, hanging wall art. So make sure you figure out your room size, take accurate measurements, and if you're not comfortable with that, hire a professional. It may not seem important, but it's actually imperative to know because sizing can dictate a lot in your design. And the last category is basics of designing your space. There are some very simple and easy tips to understand that I want to go over at the very beginning, and hopefully it'll help you answer some questions that may seem dumb because it's not like you were taught this. Some of these simple and dumb questions you only find out from actually doing it. And if it's your first time designing a room or your first time renovating or having your own space, it's really hard to know this. So I'm just going to go over some very basics of designs and hopefully it answers some questions for you. So first, you may know this, but personally, I didn't. I did, but I didn't. I didn't really think anything of it until someone actually was like, hey, what are you doing with your design? Ceiling and trim are supposed to be lighter than the walls. Plain and simple, that's how it's supposed to be. When you're picking out paint samples and comparing colors and trying to coordinate a look, you should ensure that they're all in the same tone or undertone, which basically means you want to try to pick warm or cool colors. There are cool colors and there are warm colors. So it's like kicking it back to the color wheel that we learned back in elementary school, middle school, and high school. Cooler tones have muted blues, greens, and violets. Warm undertones usually have muted reds, oranges, and yellows, giving it a softer look. However, you can have a warm blue, which basically means that that blue is going to lean towards having more of a violet hue versus more of a greener hue. And violet does contain some red in it. So that's how you can actually end up getting a warmer blue. Don't just go with like, all blues are cool, all greens are cool. You can actually have warmer blues, greens, and violets, and you can actually have cooler reds, yellows, and oranges. The next tip is always start designing, renovating, painting everything high to low. What I mean by that is you want to start from the ceiling and end on the floor. Fun fact, that's actually how you're also supposed to dust a room. The next tip, balance. There are three major types of balancing a room: symmetrical, asymmetrical, and radial, which just means round. Honestly, just stick with symmetrical. It's a heck of a lot easier and it will not drive you crazy. Radial might be a little bit easier, but asymmetrical specifically, it's really hard to design. So just stick with the basics, and that is trying to design a symmetrical room. Next tip, lighting. The lighting should be symmetrical. Done. And lastly, start with a simple design. Just do it, start simple, and then you can add more complexity as you go on. You can add textures, patterns, cool designs, nice wall art, but just start with a simple design, especially if you've never designed a room before. Renters, I will speak to your situation later, so stay tuned. Okay, property owners, I'm gonna go over the basics based off the timelines I briefly touched on in the previous part of the video, so bear with me until I get to your section. To start, if you're planning on living in your space for 5 years or longer, like I said, you can sort of do what you want, which is really convenient to you. Make sure you execute the previous topics I discussed earlier, what questions to ask yourself, design considerations. That'll give you a really good outline and plan to take your project in the right direction. And create an idea board for each room so you can put them together and make sure that your style coordinates throughout your house. If you need more clarity or if you need more help with this and you really can't figure out your idea, comment below and I'll try to give you some guidance. Because some people really hate starting with a blank canvas, which I completely understand, because when you're starting with a blank canvas, it can be really overwhelming. If you do have the budget for it and you really want to invest in your space and make it your own, but you don't know where to start, hire a local professional. You're gonna be there for a really long time. Invest in it. However, before you tune out, if you ever are planning on reselling your house, avoid major renovations that might decrease the value of your home, like reducing the number of bedrooms or bathrooms. And make sure you stay up on the upkeep of your house, because it will show long term if you're not taking care of the house. Property owners for 3 to 5 years, really tough spot to be in when you're trying to design your space, because you need to make it your own and you need to focus on resale value. Go through the questions and the design considerations above to get started. That'll really start you on the right foot. But do try to keep your personal touches to a minimum. If you do want to add more color to your space, try to stick with neutral color schemes and pastels. Lighter colors will always make a smaller space feel bigger, and darker colors will make a larger space feel a little bit smaller. If you have a giant room that's too cold and industrial, you still want to stick with pastels and neutral colors, but you can go a shade darker. Or you can even add a darker accent wall. And if you do decide to go with a darker accent wall, try to still keep it neutral. You could go with a darker gray, a darker tan, navy blue is even a little bit neutral. Try to avoid going with ostentatious colors. When you're getting ready to sell, you don't want to have to worry about painting an entire room or painting your kitchen or doing anything major like that that's going to take an entire weekend or longer. You only want to focus a little bit on painting and repairs, and you should really only focus on decluttering, organizing, cleaning, and curb appeal. Painting is not a big commitment, but it is tedious, time-consuming, and can really add additional stress when you're getting ready to sell your house. In that 3 to 5 year window, the major renovations you really should look at would be kitchen and bathrooms. With renovations to kitchen and bathrooms, you're going to get more bang for your buck, but they normally are higher budgets. The guidelines for kitchens and bathrooms is to keep them light and bright. White cabinets are blank canvases. They're easy to customize, they're classic pieces, and they're very easy to coordinate with for new homeowners. Zillow posted research a few years ago about paint colors for certain rooms that actually help increase the value of your home. For example, painting a bathroom a shade of blue increased the value of a home like over $5,000, which is pretty crazy. For kitchens, doing a light gray or a slate blue increased the value a lot too. And living rooms with a shade of taupe or beige had higher resale value. Colors to avoid were reds, yellows, and oranges, and any colors that were like a little extra or too bold. If you do want to add more personal touches, just try to do it with window dressings, adding accessories, different lighting. You can add patterns, textures, just try to make sure you harmonize the overall design. If you're planning on living your space 3 years or less, you want to primarily focus on resale value, because it'd be very inconvenient if you have to repaint and redesign the entire space again. That's just a lot to undertake in a very short period of time. When you're designing your space, just make sure you stick with neutrals, pastels. Don't go with anything too bright or colorful. Don't paint like your kitchen pink or yellow. To save money, buy a 5-gallon bucket of grays, because it can't decide whether it's a gray or a tan. It's easy to coordinate with. And paint the entire house with this color, especially if you're planning on leasing it. It makes it look really coordinated. You can pick out a color scheme and not just do like a blanket grayish, but I would recommend picking neutrals or pastels and coordinating it with Zillow's research for what has the highest resale value when you're painting a room. But do try to avoid putting too many holes in your walls, because you don't want to have to worry about patching too much when you're getting ready to sell or getting ready to lease. In summary, when you're designing for resale value, just keep the design simple, basic, and clean. Renters, this section is for you. If you want to add personal touches without spending too much money, I have some ideas for you. Personally, I wouldn't want to add too much money to someone else's property. And I understand most rentals are really bland walls and really simple, and they just don't have a lot of good energy or vibes. There are a ton of different ways to add personal touches and refurbish your space and renovate your space without spending too much money. And if you're interested in learning more about how to DIY and how to include like functional design pieces into your decor and refurbishing and giving items new life and breath, definitely subscribe. Just check it out. Subscribe to the Market Made channel. Just do it. Personally, I'm not going to spend a lot of money on a rental property with painting. That's just not who I am. I'm not spending that extra money. But what you can do is buy actually a small sample paint and then paint an accent wall. Sample paints are usually pretty cheap and they're like yay big. So all you would need would be a little bit of primer if you're painting over another color. If you're not and the walls are white, you might be able to avoid getting away with using primer and keeping the price low. Adding an accent wall will add a little bit of extra personal touch to your space. So that's always a good way. Sample paint's really cheap. $5 or less plus supplies. That's it. Wall art. This is a no-brainer. You can create your own art that is designed specifically for your space and add your own personal touch. Or if you have a favorite photo, you can easily print off some pretty large wall decor for under $100, which is super nice. And if you're not super artsy and you don't believe you can create your own art, or if you don't have a favorite photo, or if you don't think you can edit that photo, you should look at going to resale shops, outlet shops, state warehouses to find old vintage artwork or photos. There's plentiful there. The best part is you get to take it with you for your decor and your design for the next place you're gonna live. The next suggestion is a tapestry. Do you have a cool blanket or like quilt or something that your grandma gave you? That's your tapestry. Or you can get some custom looking curtains that are pretty cheap. Buy a cheap curtain rod or command hooks or some sort of fancy hooks that you can hang your faux tapestry on display. You can also layer the blankets for organizational purposes, but also make it look really cool and a focal point of your room. Another thing you could do with this idea is getting some cheap curtains and a curtain rod, and then you could DIY on the curtain to make it your own or make it look like a piece of art. All right, renters, last one, accessories. There are a ton of accessories you can pull into your design to make your space your own without spending too much money, or you can take with you later. You can get an old rustic ladder and hang your towels from it or your blankets. Usually I suggest decor that you can actually use and refurbish in the future. And I'll post a link right here about my top 15 functional design kitchen decor ideas. But I urge you to do some research online before you start purchasing to figure out what you really want to include in your design for accessories. And subscribe to my YouTube channel to learn more about functional design decor. And there you have it, how to design your space and what details to consider before you get started. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you like this content, remember to subscribe to the Market Made channel. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.